Brian, thank you so much for joining us on Social Impact Power Chats. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm excited to be here.
Amazing. So, would love to have you start us out with your coordinates. How did you get into social impact?
Yeah, so I started my career, I would say, a political campaign hack. So I started working in Washington for a national political party, doing communications work there. I then went to Louisiana, did political work there, which is everything you would expect Louisiana politics to be. And then moved to Georgia, worked at the legislature, worked for a political party there. And then I said, all right, number one, politics is a young person's game, although I was still in my early 20s or mid 20s at this point. But I realized I wanted to learn how to think a different way. With political campaigns,
Hmm.
it's all about 50% plus one by a very particular date, which is election day. Really, nothing else matters. There's not long term strategy or not a lot of diverse thinking as far as that goes. So I knew I wanted to learn differently. And so I actually got recruited to join a public relations and public affairs agency and led a lot of their public affairs work for corporate clients. And this time, sort of in my mid 20s, I realized, or I guess late 20s, that I realized that I was doing good work, but I wasn't doing good. And I was really ready for the work that I did to be more meaningful, which took me to the American Cancer Society and working with their advocacy affiliate. And for me, when I think about social impact, for me, that's advocacy, and that's grassroots advocacy. And so that was the beginning of what I would consider to be my social impact journey.
Amazing. And so, take us from that rooting to today. Can you describe a little bit about, your work, your practice, and how you spend your time professionally now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was with the Cancer Society for 1 month shy of 20 years. And for the last 15 of those, I led their digital engagement work. And what that meant was I had the opportunity to work with volunteers from across the country. And this is where things became just so meaningful for me to work on passing laws that increase funding for cancer research. I was played a lead role in helping with our work in passing the Affordable Care Act, which brought health care to cancer survivors, many for the very first time they could ever get their own health care without relying on a spouse or somebody else. And then, so about 3 years ago, I decided to go out on my own and launch my own consulting shop where now I get to work with national nonprofit organizations, working with their advocacy teams, helping them get their volunteers and members more engaged in their advocacy campaigns, helping them have a greater societal impact and social impact. So everything from digital, a lot of email strategy and digital engagement strategy, as well as helping them build out a volunteer force. So building out a cohort of people who want to do more, who want to build relationships with a lawmaker, be involved with that organization for several years, not just sort of in a transactional nature, and really help move legislation forward to benefit their constituency.
Brilliant. I remember being in a lecture in college and, hearing people talk about public policy and seeing something terrible happening downriver. I forget the lecturer I think was saying, there's children coming down the river and you could pull them out one at a time. But if you go upstream and figure out how to stop the kids from falling in the river in the first place, that's policy, right? So I totally drank the Kool-Aid a long time ago and love the framing. I'd love to ask you, thinking about it through the lens of funders who are asked to make this decision between macro and micro work often, or alternatively thinking about it as a nonprofit that, is considering whether or not to engage in an advocacy play. What's your litmus test? How would you have people think about when policy work is worth it? When is the juice worth the squeeze?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of really big benefits. I will tell you from a fundraising and donation perspective, every organization I've worked for, worked with, and that has shared some of their data, they actually show that volunteers who are engaged in advocacy actually have higher lifetime giving scores, higher sort of however they're scoring their list as far as donor opportunity. So people involved in advocacy give more and give for longer periods of time. So it is actually a really great way
Hmm.
to bolster fundraising work for a nonprofit organization is to be engaging more and more people in advocacy and exposing people to the advocacy work you're doing. When it comes to that litmus test, it really comes down to how much can you do? How many people can you help one-on-one? And look, there's a lot, you see it right now, all the hurricane relief efforts that are going on in North Carolina and other places. There's a lot of great work happening on one-on-one and a lot of great things, a lot of great impact you can have. But there are certain societal needs that can't be handled in that way. So when I was at the American Cancer Society, one of the things that we did was we helped get the Affordable Care Act passed. And so this was an opportunity. Like I said, I worked with a volunteer from California where she was a cancer survivor. She was involved in our campaign. She had always relied on her husband for health insurance, but she got divorced and she ran a small business. And so this was a woman who wanted to be an entrepreneur and do well for her family, but was struggling because she couldn't get health insurance, couldn't afford health insurance on her own. And so it was pretty incredible for me. So she was a big volunteer for the campaign. After the law passed, she was in California. The day it was going to go into effect in California, she stayed up all night because she wanted to be the very first person to log into the system to get her own health care. Because for the first time in her life, she was able to get her own health care, and she was not going to miss that opportunity. And so those are types of things that it's very hard to do on a one-on-one basis.
It makes total sense. So, one of the things that we always ask guests is, if you were sitting across from somebody having coffee who was asking advice from you, how do you stand up an advocacy campaign? What things should we be considering? Are there stumbling blocks that we should avoid? I know it really probably depends on the state, the issue, et cetera, but do you have any, more generic advice that you think would be beneficial for anybody kind of thinking through these questions?
Absolutely. So first is have a goal and have several goals. I'm a very goal-oriented person. And goals aren't just about the policy. So what is the policy goal you want to achieve? What's the change you want to make? But then also think about what are the internal goals? What are the benefits of getting a cohort of volunteers more involved? How many volunteers do we want to get engaged, or members if you're a member organization? What do we want to achieve with those folks? Do we just want them to take an action? Do we also want to have a fundraising goal associated with that? And thinking longer term about what you want to achieve as far as building out a movement. Because if you're going to go through this effort to begin getting involved in advocacy, you don't want to do it just for one thing, because you're going to build this really powerful, effective force that can help both internally and externally. So I'm a very big believer in sort of getting those goals set out very clearly before you get started.
It's so smart. Who are the types of experts that you tap when you're thinking about these goals? Like who are the people that need to be in the room when those goals are being considered?
Yeah, so the great thing about this is what I always recommend, which is a challenge sometimes, especially at bigger organizations, is to bring more people into the room. Sometimes they'll have an advocacy person in the room or the CEO in the room, but have your fundraiser there, have your communications there. Done well, advocacy is going to impact every part of your organization in a very positive way. Or maybe some negative things are going to come up, from time to time throughout a campaign that you want everybody involved as well, so they're knowledgeable and they can help address some of those things quickly, cut them off and keep things going in the right direction again. So have the influential people in your organization, have people who understand how to work with volunteers, how to communicate with volunteers and staff, how to motivate folks. And advocacy is all about engagement and motivation and using the right motivation. How to communicate well. A lot of times people get involved in a policy effort and they're talking way up here about what a policy does. So, keep it, you want people who can help you just keep it really simple. We want to increase funding for cancer research because it's going to lead to more cures and save more lives. That's it. We don't need to get into how the National Institutes of Health work and National Cancer Institute works. So have people there who really know how to communicate and motivate. And then, especially if you're a nonprofit or even the corporate level, later on, not in the room at the beginning, but at some point, run it all by your lawyers to make sure they're okay and that you're protected in the work that you're doing. But don't have the lawyers in the room right away, because all lawyers do is sort of throw barriers at you. And I always like for these conversations to start without barriers. It's much easier and better to put barriers in later on. than to have them at the beginning.
That makes sense. We'll have all the lawyers watching put their earmuffs on for that clip. So, I can't believe it. Power chats go fast. We're already at our last question, which is future looking. If you had a crystal ball, what are the trends that you see coming down the pike in your corner of social impact?
Yeah, so my corner right now, everybody wants to know what's going to happen 20 days from now, um, on election day. And so I don't have that crystal ball, but what I do know is regardless of the impact of the results of the 2024 election, there is still a huge role for grassroots advocacy to drive real societal change. And so the players in power might be different, but at the end of the day, engaging volunteers, engaging your list of people in advocacy is always going to be positive for your organization. It's going to lead, like I said, it's going to help your donation. It's going to help your engagement. It's going to help with your communications. And so advocacy is going to continue to be important. Your volunteers and members should continue to play a leading role in the work that you're doing. And the more you get folks involved and the more opportunity you give them, the greater impact you're going to be able to have.
Well, having seen some of this firsthand, I couldn't agree more. Brian, I really appreciate you joining today, and thank you for all that you do to advocate for positive change in so many different ways.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's been great talking with you.